all the learners. Welcome to CEC lecture. The topic of analysis is Treaty of Versailles. We all know Treaty of Versailles is a very important topic with reference to world history. In this lecture, we shall try to understand the context which led to the Treaty of Versailles. We shall explain the consequences and how it led to rise of new issues which have a very important bearing on world history. In this lecture, we shall analyze the various clauses of the treaty with respect to the end of the First World War, rise of the Second World War and related aspects of it with reference to international relations perspectives. In this lecture, we shall try to understand Treaty of Versailles from the framework of end of Cold War. Was it responsible for the Second World War? And what are the various important issues concerning Treaty of Versailles which have a bearing on international relations perspectives? The context as we try to understand Treaty of Versailles, one has to take into account that how the environment of world politics was hostile after the end of the First World War, and the aim of this treaty within this hostile environment following the First World War was intended to bring peace in the Europe continent. When we talk about the First World War, we all know that aggressive nationalism, imperialism and colonialism, militarism, alliances were the important causes of the First World War. This was triggered by the assassination of the Austrian Archduke Franz Ferdinand. The guiding idea of Treaty of Versailles, which happened after the end of the First World War, the guiding idea of that was based on principles of Woodrow Wilson, popularly called as the 14 principles of President Woodrow Wilson, the 14 points speech. The Paris Peace Conference was convened in January 1919 at Versailles, Paris. The aim of the Paris Peace Conference in 1919 was to establish the terms of the peace after the Second World War. We all know, dear learners, that how peace was essential because Europe was undergoing a huge amount of hostile environment. In this realm, peace was essential. So, Treaty of Versailles, wherein there was an attempt to factor in peace based on President Woodrow Wilson's 14 points. Further, when we look into Treaty of Versailles, there are additional arguments to that. One of the important arguments in this context is that nearly 30 nations participated. Representatives of United Kingdom, France, United States and Italy became known as the Big Four. So, the argument here is that the Big Four dominated the proceedings that led to formulation of Treaty of Versailles. And this Treaty of Versailles is often said that this treaty ended the First World War. We take reference to a very important work to elaborate our argument. Corona Brezina's work, Treaty of Versailles 1919, a primary source examination of the treaty that ended the First World War, is a very interesting work. Now, this book tells us that how, with the signing of Treaty of Versailles in 1919, which ended the First World War, the later built up to the war, and how this book describes on the ceremony, the confusion, negotiations of the peace treaty, providing insight into the anger and impulse to punish Germany. Now, this is very essential to be read, the confusion and the negotiation and the issues that were there with reference to punishment of Germany. Another important work is by Michael S. Neiberg, the Treaty of Versailles, a very short introduction. Now, this, it highlights some of the critical voices also. That is that somewhere it is argued that Treaty of Versailles was not an apt compromise. creating a precarious order in Europe and abroad, and somewhere it was destined to fall short of ensuring lasting peace. Dear learners, in this book it is highlighted that dominant powers, the ambiguous role of the big four leaders, Woodrow Wilson of the United States, David Lloyd George of Great Britain, Vittorio Emanuele Orlando of Italy, and Georges Clemenceau of France. That is a very important argument this book makes, that when we try to look at the hostile atmosphere following the end of the Cold War and the Treaty of Versailles therein, the complex world in which we inhabit today, post decolonization, Second World War, the Cold War, somewhere there is a need to understand it in a deeper manner. Let us now delve into some of the clauses of Treaty of Versailles. The Article 1 to 30 and the Annex talks about Covenant of League of Nations. Article 13 to 117 and annexes talk about the political clauses for Europe. Article 118 to 158 and annexes talk about German rights and interests outside Germany. Article 159 to 213 look into military, naval and air clauses. Article 214 to 226 looks into issues of prisoners of wars and graves. Article 227 to 230 looks into penalties. Article 231 to 247 look and annexes look into repatriations. Article 248 to 263 look into financial causes. Article 264 to 312 look into economic clauses. Article 321 to 386 it looks into ports, waterways, railways. Article 387 to 389 looks into issues of labor, amongst others. Now, why was that this Treaty of Versailles becomes problematic? Under Article 1 to 26, somewhere critics have pointed out, it was pointed out that Germany was not allowed to join the League of Nations. However, under the Weimar Republic, Germany was later admitted to the League of Nations through a resolution passed on September 8, 1926. Under Article 42, all fortification in Rhineland and 31 miles east of river were to be demolished. Germany was forbidden to unite with Austria. Under Article 80, this was prohibited without the consent of League of Nations. Further, Germany had to cut its army. Article 163, wherein it was forbidden to take part in any military exercise, whether theoretical or practical. Article 231 of this treaty, often known as the War Guilt Clause. Germany had to accept the responsibility for the losses and damages caused by the war as a consequence of the aggression of Germany and her allies, as we read from the War Guilt Clause. Now, we all know Treaty of Versailles was guided by President Wilson's 14 points. Now, what were the 14 points? US President Woodrow Wilson highlighted on 14 aspects, namely open diplomacy without secret treaties. Second, economic free trade on the seas during war and peace. Third, equal trade conditions. Fourth, decrease armaments amongst all nations. Fifth, adjust colonial claims. Sixth, evacuation of all Central Powers from Russia and allow it to define on its own independence. Seventh, Belgium to be evacuated and restored. Eighth, return of Alsace-Lorraine region and French territory. Ninth, readjust Italian borders. 10th, Austria-Hungary to be provided an opportunity for self-determination. 11th, redraw the borders of the Balkan region, creating Romania, Serbia and Montenegro. 12th, creation of a Turkish state with guaranteed free trade in Dardanelles. 13, creation of independent Polish state. 14, creation of the League of Nations. Now, League of Nations, as Treaty of Versailles also pointed out, when we read through the Covenant of the League of Nations, that is very essential, that is, in order to promote international cooperation and to achieve international peace and security, has been pointed out as one of the important aims of League of Nations. And how? By acceptance of obligation and not to resort to war. Once again, we are reading all these points from the Covenant of the League of Nations. That's the argument between the contracting parties. And by acceptance of obligation and not to resort to war, and further by prescription of open, just and honorable relations between nations. The Covenant of the League of Nations also points out, and we quote from there, by firm establishment of the understanding of international law as an actual rule of conduct amongst the government. Further, the Covenant of League of Nations also point out, and we quote from there, by the maintenance of justice and a scrupulous respect for all treaty obligations in the dealings of organized peoples with one another. Now, with the formation of League of Nations, world witnessed the first intergovernmental organization. Its aim was to avoid a repeat of any war and to develop cooperation amongst nations and to guarantee them peace and security. Now, the idea of a mechanism to ensure peace has always been there. For example, the Lorenco agreements signed in 1925. It was definitely an important attempt on part of League of Nations, which marked the beginnings of a Franco-German reconciliation, and they were entrusted to the League. Further, League did some important work too. There were conferences, intergovernmental committees, meetings of experts which were held in Geneva in areas like health, social affairs, transport, economic and financial affairs. But at the same time, when we look into the functioning of League of Nations, no doubt it was the world's first worldwide intergovernmental organization to secure peace and security. It did some work in the area of reconciliation and other areas like transport, economic and financial affairs. But at the same time, it was not capable to prevent aggression. Its failure in preventing aggression is often critiqued. Example, invasion of Manchuria by Japan, the annexation of Ethiopia by Italy in 1936, Austria by Hitler in 1938. Further, then there were contested terms and roles also when we talk about League of Nations. The argument is that United States entered the war in 1917 as an associated power. While it fought along the Allies, and United States was not bound to honor pre-existing agreements amongst the Allied powers. Further, the treaty negotiations were also weakened. Why? Because of absence of important nations. Russia had fought war as one of the allies until December 1917. The Allied powers refused to recognize the new Bolshevik government in Russia and thus did not invite its representatives to the peace conference. Then further it is pointed out that how there was exclusion of defeated central powers, namely Germany, Austria, Hungary, Turkey, Bulgaria, amongst others. Further, there is an important argument that when we try to analyze Treaty of Versailles, that is, this treaty subjected Germany to strict measures, which it led to surrender of approximately 10% of its pre-war territory in Europe and lot of overseas possessions. It placed the harbor city of Danzig and the coal-rich Saarland under the administration of League of Nations. This treaty allowed France to get access to economic resources of the Saarland until 1935. So, there is this argument when we try to analyze Treaty of Versailles, that is, this treaty has been dubbed as dictated peace. Treaty has been criticized as dictated peace. Why? Because it has been pointed out that Germany was not allowed to take part in the negotiations. Further, demilitarization. Germany was forced to drastically reduce its armed forces to weaken its defense. Another argument in the same light that how this peace led to further conflict because there was reduction in territory. That is, this treaty empowered the Allied states to control Germany's overseas colonies in China, Pacific, Africa, and declared them as League of Nations mandates. Further, it forced Germany to cede its territory to Belgium, Czechoslovakia, Poland, and return Alsace and Lorraine to France. The issue of war guilt clause, wherein Germany was solely held responsible for the war, has often been criticized with reference to analysis of Treaty of Versailles. In the Treaty of Versailles, there was an important reference to League of Nations. Now, with this, there are some important insights that one gets from United States domestic politics that time. There was Senate opposition to Article 10 of the treaty, which dealt with collective security and the League of Nations. The reservationists that were led by the Senate Foreign Relations Committee Chairman Henry Cabot Lodge, they wanted amendments before they would ratify the treaty. However, the Chairman Lodge's attempt to pass amendment to the treaty was unsuccessful, but then there were 14 reservations. If you go by the accounts from history.state.gov, that's a very important academic resource to understand United States constitutional and domestic issues, that how the chairman of Senate Foreign Relations Committee was able to get 14 reservations to the proposed treaty, and in the final vote, Treaty of Versailles fell short of ratification by 7 votes. This is on March 19, 1920. And this is why Senate is often seen that many foreign affairs treaties get defeated. So herein, when we look into this argument of Chairman Lodge versus President Wilson's dialogue, it has a bearing with reference to idealism versus realism in international relations. President Wilson, as an idealist, sought peace without victory, whereas Chairman Lodge, the realist, demanded Germany's unconditional surrender. There are academic work that points out that how the idealist-realist debate, idealism placing a lot of primacy on the cooperative, the positive side of international relations, realists pointing towards a conflictual side of international reality, and how after Chairman Lodge's committee added numerous reservations and amendments to the treaty, the President Wilson then took his campaign to the nation. In November, very interesting, Chairman Lodge sent to the Senate the treaty with 14 reservations but no amendments. And in the face of President Wilson's continued unwillingness to negotiate, the Senate on 19 November 1919, for the first time in its history, rejected a peace treaty. So what we see here is that how Treaty of Versailles and its proposed idea of League of Nations had a huge bearing on domestic politics of respective superpowers. The US government signed the Treaty of Berlin on 25th August 1921. This separate peace treaty with Germany stipulated that United States would enjoy all rights, privileges, indemnities, repatriations or advantages conferred to it by the Treaty of Versailles, but left out any mention of the League of Nations, which United States never joined. So an important argument that has been given with reference to analysis of League of Nations also, that is, the Treaty of Versailles did propose League of Nations. However, the League of Nations as the world's first intergovernmental organization, though it did work, however, it was not successful to prevent another world crisis, and one of the reasons of it that President Woodrow Wilson, who was one of the guiding person to lead the League of Nations, the very superpower United States did not join the League of Nations. President Woodrow Wilson was opposed further to use of such harsh terms for Germany. On the other hand, when we look into the inside reading of Treaty of Versailles and its clauses, the French Prime Minister Georges Clemenceau, as we all know, we must take into account that France was the only allied power to share a border with Germany. France had suffered in the First World War. The French Prime Minister Georges Clemenceau wanted the harsh terms in the treaty with reference to Germany. So there is an argument that is pointed out that when we try to analyze Treaty of Versailles, it is argued and pointed out that it was created more through fear and anger rather than forgiveness. So what we see here is Treaty of Versailles. It is a very important landmark treaty that led to the end of the First World War. However, this treaty has a huge bearing with reference to the causes of the Second World War, as well as an important bearing with reference to issues of peace versus cooperation, idealism versus realism in international reality. Treaty of Versailles, based on President Woodrow Wilson's 14 points, did lead to creation of League of Nations. League of Nations trying to promote international cooperation and achieve international peace and security somewhere was not adequate, did not do sufficient work in terms of preventing aggression in Manchuria, annexation of Ethiopia, amongst others. Further, when we look into Treaty of Versailles, the contested terms and roles, the role of United States, absence of other important nations, exclusion of defeated powers, subjecting Germany to strict measures, all of it have been critically analyzed, and quite often this treaty has been called as dictated peace. Further, when we look into Treaty of Versailles, one must take reference to the impact the idea of League of Nations had on domestic politics of United States, wherein for the first time the Senate rejected a peace treaty, because as per United States constitutional apparatus, the foreign affairs treaty, any foreign affairs or international treaty, has to be ratified by the Senate. So, as we look into Treaty of Versailles and its bearing with reference to world history, we take reference to a very important work by Simon Jackson, Alana O'Malley, The Institution of International Order from the League of Nations to the United States. Now, in this edited research work, we get the sense that formalizing, proliferating political ideas, institutions indeed generate new spectrums, new ways to factor in negotiation and dissidence and recodified norms. No doubt League of Nations may not have succeeded, as the work really makes some important arguments, yet it is important that while not always successful, ultimately unable to prevent the Second World War, it did serve the basis for rise of the United Nations. It did present the first experiment of an intergovernmental organization to work for peace, to work for cooperation amongst others. The world did see the Second World War, wherein the Treaty of Versailles has been seen as one of the important causes of the Second World War, the German desire for revenge, the economic downturns, the rise of extremism, the rise of alliances, the failure of appeasement, all of it led to the Second World War. Treaty of Versailles established a blueprint for post-war world. Treaty of Versailles did bring an end to the First World War. However, its terms worked in a manner that led to new conflicts and led to issues that were responsible for the rise of the Second World War. It forced Germany to disarm, pay for territorial concessions, pay for repatriation to Allied powers. This treaty then could not contain the rise of extreme nationalism in the then world history and European world history in Italy, in Germany and in Japan. However, this treaty did present a blueprint for the world order, for looking into issues of governance ranging from a world organization, intergovernmental organization, correcting the mistakes of the past, but yet in this blueprint, its terms and its working worked in a manner that led to new issues. Dear learners, we hope that the lecture on Treaty of Versailles, with reference to the bearing it has on world history, with reference to end of First World War, rise of Second World War, and with reference to the debate of idealism versus realism in international reality, we hope this lecture presented to you significant inputs and insights. We look forward to positive, encouraging feedback from you all. Thank you very much.